Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 80, and you've tuned in to watch two men age in place. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And like the Anglican Communion, we're not quite dead yet. Today is August 31st, 2013.
George, let's quickly move on to story one. Last week, you and I reported on Justin Welby's drunken sermon, where he talked about the Anglican Church is like a drunk person on the precipice of a cliff about to fall over because he's having trouble discovering whether or not he's traditional or he's a liberal. And we kind of mentioned, yeah, kind of, but you don't want to embrace the middle way because he's not drunk, he's been poisoned because he's taking all these streams in. And it's kind of like the 50 Shades of Faith, and we don't really apply that to a church. Ooh, I just used a great 2013 analogy. Oh, I love it. So we've learned this week that Justin Welby has met with the Communion Partner Bishops, which are a group of bishops here in America who represent, I hate to use the word, the traditional faith of the Episcopal Church. They haven't gone with all the nouveau nuances that we find in the leadership of the Episcopal Church. They flew over to Canterbury, sat down with the Archbishop, Justin Welby, and that guy he appointed for his mediation, I forget his name. And they talked about what, George?
Well, they basically had a meet and greet session. And we don't know exactly what happened in this meeting. The Communion Partner Bishops released a statement noting the fact that they did meet, noting the fact the Archbishop's prayers are with them. But if you read between the lines, what we're seeing is the education of Justin Welby. See, Justin Welby and most English church leaders have a very black and white vision of the Episcopal Church in the United States and the Anglican Church in North America. We saw that in Justin Welby's sermon in Mexico City last week on the 13th. Justin Welby basically posited that there is a sort of an atheistic church, and he didn't name names, but that's Katharine Jefferts Schori. And then there's a rigid Calvinist, nasty church, and he didn't name names, but that's Bob Duncan. And he said Anglicanism needs to walk the middle way between nasty Katharine Jefferts Schori and mean Bob Duncan. He's met with Bob Duncan in private, he's met with Katharine Jefferts Schori in private, and he's not happy with either side, it seems. And now he's met with the Communion Partner Bishops, who are basically saying to them, look, it's not just black and white. There are these shades of gray. These are these shades of faith in the Episcopal Church. And I applaud Justin Welby because, unlike Rowan Williams, he's actually trying to find out about the facts on the ground. He's trying to figure out what's going on in America.
Rowan Williams, his approach was, let's make a report, get a committee together, and give me the report, and I'll shred it. And that was done many times. We had, the panel of reference. We had
the Windsor process.
The Windsor process, the Windsor report. We'll get the primates together, and they'll agree on a statement. I'll agree to follow through on the statement, but I won't. That was Rowan Williams. Now, Justin Welby, he's kind of playing, I'm going to use a real popular fictional character, Sherlock Holmes, here, and he's trying to look into it. Now, I'm not guaranteeing we're going to have a happy result, but at least he's doing firsthand, talking to the individuals. He's not relying on committee reports. He's not relying on Windsor reports or panel references. He's meeting with the characters involved. That's important. Does it guarantee a great result? No. Does this make Justin Welby perfect? No, but he's better than his predecessor, and that's good enough for me, for a start.
And I have to admit, this can seem to be very frustrating. For people who've been going through the Episcopal Wars on both sides and in the middle, how can someone not know what's going on in the Episcopal Church, within the Anglican Church of North America? Well, the answer is, even in this day of the internet and of newspapers and of blogs, very few people follow this stuff closely. And remember, Justin Welby has only been a bishop for about a year and a half, 2 years. This is a guy who until very recently was the Dean of Liverpool Cathedral. And he was not someone who was involved in any way, shape, or form with the wider Anglican communion. And he relies upon aides and staffers. He relies upon the Anglican Consultative Council to tell him what is going on, and he's discovered he can't trust them. So he is beginning to make his own investigations.
It is interesting. You and I go through this process all the time, looking at who's going to Anglican Inc. and how many people view what story and stuff like that. And we've discovered there's the hardcore 300. In this whole world of Anglicanism, there's 300 hardcore people that will visit every Anglican blog and mostly comment on what they see. There's the interested 600, the people that, about 600 people that will go to the news sites on there and check out what's going on every day with some interest. There's about 3,000 people who have access to the computers and once a week will go to these websites to catch up on news. Other than that, there's the other 80 million Anglicans who have better things to do with their lives by serving the gospel, growing the church, and raising families. And so we're not always going to penetrate the whole world of Anglican news. And it's not surprising that Justin Welby, who's been safe with Trinity Brompton and other things, isn't well aware of all that's happening in the communion. And I don't mind if he puts on his little Sherlock Holmes hat, he smokes his pipe, and talks with his violin.
The other thing, I think we need to give some space to the communion partners bishops. They've been vilified on a number of websites for being, for want of a better word, weenies, of ecclesiastical go-along, get-along guys who aren't cold enough to be liberals but aren't warm enough to be conservatives. They just want to stay where they are. And it's unfair to attack the people for their faith positions because they truly believe that the way that they're going forward is the honorable, just Christian way. They feel called to stay within the Episcopal Church. They feel called to reform it from within. Now, you may not agree that this is the best way to go, but that's the way they're going. And remember, even though there were only 6 of them, and there are probably many, many more bishops in the Episcopal Church who share their views, these 6 were the guys who were willing to put their head above the trench, above the parapet, because, other guys who've done this in the past have had their heads handed to them.
It's time for our legal segment. It's going to be one of the first segments in Anglican Unscripted, episode 80, because we have lots of good news around the legal community. We're going to dive down to Texas and then talk about South Carolina. First, let's talk about Texas. Reality, it's expensive to go to court. When you go to court, you're going to go to court for a long time. And when I say that, I went down in 2008 for the first vote for the Diocese of Fort Worth to leave the Episcopal Church. A year later, they had the second vote. They've done everything by the rules of a corporation on how to leave the Episcopal Church. They got sued. They ended up in court. And once in a while, there's victories. But this isn't the final victory. Let's go about and describe what happened so far and what has to be done, Alan.
Okay. Well, today is a great milestone for Bishop Eicher and his diocese, and also for the Church of the Good Shepherd in San Angelo in the Diocese of Northwestern Texas. They both got the Supreme Court to agree, first of all, that neutral principles of law is the rule to be applied by all courts in Texas. The Supreme Court hadn't addressed this issue since 1909, and it was good to get this clear for once and for all for everybody that's doing all this litigating over these church properties. So neutral principles of law applies. And what does that mean? It means that the court does not automatically defer just because a church says, hey, we're the Episcopal Church, we're the big poobahs, and we've made an ecclesiastical determination, quote unquote, which all the courts have to bow down to and accept as we give it to them. Under neutral principles, know that there's no special treatment like that. They have to show by their documents, their governing documents, and their bylaws, and their deeds, and their corporate charters, exactly who has control over what.
I think that's
and who owns title to the property.
That's the most important point. Is if your name is on the deed, it's very hard to take it away from you now because neutral principles apply.
Yeah, one of the most important things that and follows from that, if your name is on the deed and somebody else like Episcopal Church comes along and says, well, you've agreed to put your trust in property, your property into trust for me, the church, And you say, well, where's the written deed of trust? Where's the deed by which I put it in trust? Where's the writing signed by me? That's neutral principles. Whereas deference is simply saying the Episcopal Church, oh, well, we declared a trust on your property long ago and you didn't do anything about it, so you're stuck. So that's why it's so important, neutral principles in Texas. And they showed how it should be done in the San Angelo case. 7 of the justices, of the court's 9 justices, agreed that under Texas law, the Dennis Canon has no validity because it is not signed by the parish, as Texas law requires. And furthermore, even if it did have some sort of ecclesiastical validity as a church doing something that a parish had agreed to, the trust is revocable under Texas law because it does not expressly say this shall be forever irrevocable. And therefore, the parish could revoke the trust at any time. So this means that San Angelo holds its property in free and clear. I mean, the Church of the Good Shepherd holds its property free and clear of any trust by the diocese or by the Episcopal Church. And that should be a simple thing for it to prove on remand. The title to the deed is in its name, and that would be the end of the proof as far as neutral principles. Now, in the Bishop Eicher case for the diocese, it's a little more complicated because there we don't have a Dennis Canon as such. The Dennis Canon only applies to parish property and not to the property of diocese. And furthermore, the diocese, the corporation of the Diocese of Fort Worth is, as its name says, an incorporated entity. So it's not, it too is a corporation under Texas law. And by its own canon, the corporation of the Diocese of Fort Worth holds title to all parish properties in the diocese. So there's no issue as to who holds title. And in Bishop Eicher's case, it's instead the issue is who actually controls the diocesan corporation. If you'll recall, what happened, the sequence of events was that first the diocese itself, the convention, voted to withdraw from the Episcopal Church. And that amended the Articles of Incorporation of the Diocesan Corporation to take the Episcopal Church off its name. And then they passed some other bylaws saying who would be recognized as the chairman of the corporation, only Bishop Eicher. So those were challenged by Ecusa, who came in and said, well, once the convention voted to leave, all those people were disqualified and automatically booted out of office. And the Texas court seemed to be saying, not so fast. Texas law says how you get directors and trustees out of office. There's no magic power. A church can come in and wave a wand and boom, you're gone. We have to follow Texas law and procedure. And so in that case, then, as I say, as long as they apply neutral principles of Texas law, there has to be a meeting of the proper shareholders to vote on who are going to be the directors, the trustees, and all that kind of thing. And all the regular procedures of Texas law have to be followed for things to change. And that's going to be very hard on remand when these cases both now go back to the trial court for further proceedings under this neutral principles approach.
Well,
and it's going to be very hard on remand for if Ecusa and for the Episcopal Rump Diocese of Fort Worth to make a showing that the canons and bylaws of the church prevented this diocesan corporation from changing its articles so as to take its membership out of Ecusa.
One of the interesting things Tech did, or Acusa did in this, is they went for the money again from the Diocese of Fort Worth. They said, we want you to take an inventory, we want you to put up a bond, and they really tried to tie up the fundage that the diocese could use in legal defense of their property. What happens to the bond now that all that money they had to put aside to keep the inventory up?
The bond is dissolved because the bond secured the judgment of the trial court, and now the Supreme Court of Texas has reversed that judgment. So it's like it erased it from the books. It doesn't exist anymore. So the bond is dissolved. All the monies are freed up again.
Now, the ultimate questions have not been answered. This is only the answer of neutral principles. And everybody said, all the courts agree in principle that neutral principles is the law of the land of Texas. Bishop Eicher did not have the courts yet determine who is the real diocese of Fort Worth. That goes, now they get sent back to court, and they have to argue that based only on, or mostly on, neutral principles, right?
Yes, that'll be for Judge Chupp to take a look at all the, as I said, the corporate documents, the articles, the bylaws, and the procedures that were followed, the minutes, the meetings, and everything like that. was everything done in accordance with Texas law? And of course, Bishop Eicher, I'm sure, had the attorneys guarantee that that was all done according to Texas law. So that should hopefully be the end of it on trial. As I say, it's a big win from that point of view, is because as long as you follow the actual laws of the state in which you're operating, you shouldn't have a problem.
All right, let's move on to a different state, which also interestingly follows the correct interpretation of neutral principles. That would be South Carolina. South Carolina, the latest news is what?
Well, in that case, too, as you remember, in 2009, the South Carolina Supreme Court handed ECUSA its head, so to speak, by saying your Dennis Cannon doesn't even get off the ground here in South Carolina. It has to be a trust signed by the property owner, the person who's putting the property in trust. And so now what happened when Bishop Lawrence took his diocese out of the church, they came after, of course, Bishop Lawrence and all his property. And then federal court, they tried to do an end run around this state court ruling that they knew was against them. So they went up to federal court and tried to get the federal court to decide the case on federal trademark principles. So you had the unseemly spectacle of Bishop von Rosenberg suing another bishop of the church about marks and insignia of the church that are, basically the cross and the various symbols that the church has used for over 2,000 years. And they're fighting it out in court as to who has the right to display these symbols. And the federal court washed its hand of it and said, no, if this is going to be, it's already in state court, we're going to let the state courts decide it. There's going to be no end run.
Now, it's interesting because you can tick off, make mad, anger a state court judge by instantly trying to go over his head.
Yes.
Is the state judge aware of the court proceedings filed federally?
I'm sure she is, and if not, she will be fully briefed in the future proceedings of this, because there is a motion for contempt that is due to be heard, and the judge is going to see everyone and hear these motions. I think it's the October 11th is the date that's been set. So we should have some more news on just how far these people transgress the court's earlier order by what they've done when we get the news of what the judge does after October 11th.
Yeah. So we're going to await a final decision. It's still going to be maybe a year away for Diocese of Fort Worth and for other things, especially what's going on in South Carolina. However,
and the next
yes?
thing, the next thing that's going to happen will be there'll be a decision from the trial judge in Quincy.
That should be by the end of next month. So that's coming up pretty quick.
That should be in the next couple of weeks or so, right? And that'll be another case of ruling whether the diocese followed all the proper state conventions and laws and procedures in withdrawing from the church.
A lot of people are wondering right now, every time you go on vacation is when these things break. You're not on vacation this time. Not yet.
No, we're due to depart in a few days, so this one came in just under the wire.
So from the home of Alan Haley and from here in Connecticut, signing off. Thank you for your time, Alan. Digitally, English. I told you we don't speak English here in America. Yeah. Via the magic of Skype and digitally remastered, I have Peter Old on the other line. How are you doing today, Peter?
I'm good, Kevin. How are you?
Good. We need to follow up on your bromance with the Archbishop of Justin Welby, and
Yeah.
he was at a event this week, and he was asked a question by the press. And before we respond to what he said, let's tell people about what British press are really like. Every question is usually a gotcha question, and it's a tabloid-driven market. I remember walking down the streets of London, and people are handing out free papers all the time, and it's all about what's in the news and getting as many people to read your articles as possible. And it's not quite this bad in America. It's a little bit different mindset. So when the Archbishop answers a question, he knows that it's going to be in that night's edition of whatever, and he doesn't want it to be the top headline. Archbishop Justin Welby hates homosexuals.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, when Rowan Williams used to answer a question, you wouldn't be in time for tonight's edition by the time he was finished. Okay, so let's go on. So Justin Welby's a bit better, but yes, what the newspapers, tabloids, or broadsheets are looking for are little sound bites that they can use to spin into a story, and that's exactly what has happened this week in Britain. Justin Welby was at the opening of the new building for the Evangelical Alliance, which is what it says it is. It's the sort of grouping of evangelicals across the Christian denominations in the UK. And they've got a new spanky building, and he was speaking at the opening of that. It was the anniversary of Martin Luther King's famous, "I Have a Dream" speech. I thought he was talking a little bit about racism and so on, and he did a nice speech, and that was fine. And then afterwards, there was a question and answer session, and of course, all the journalists asked some questions that were completely unrelated to what he's just spoken about. They asked some questions that they wanted to do a little stir their pot. So a guy called Andrew Brown, who's not the most conservative of all journalists, to say the least, from the Guardian newspaper, basically asked him whether he regretted having voted against the same-sex marriage bill when it went through the House of Lords. And Justin Welby gave a very clear, very articulate answer, in which he basically said, "No, I don't regret it. I would do it again. But what we have to do is we have to realise that certainly most under 35s today see the traditional Christian viewpoint as being brutally homophobic and equivalent to racist. That's what they think, even if that's not true. And there is this general antipathy to the church. So he wants to think through clearly where the Church of England is going to go on this, and that's what he said. But he said, articulated very clearly, if tomorrow I had to vote again, I would vote no on the same-sex marriage bill. Pretty clear, nicely conservative, with a kind of sort of openness, a kind of missional openness, I would say, in saying, how do we articulate our truth in the 21st century? A humble recognition that the Church of England is divided on this, and that was it. And then all hell broke loose.
Well, all hell broke loose because the interpretation of that is thus far, okay, we're letting the under 35s lead how we march on the issues of homosexuality, marriage, sexual differences and stuff like that. And there's truth to the fear in that, because we've had previous archbishops who have given answers that nobody could ever figure out.
Yeah, and it's a fear, but that's not what Justin Welby said. Or he simply observed that most under 35 don't understand the church position on this, because they have grown up in a world where homosexuality is not just normal, it is to be endorsed, it's to be proud of. So naturally they would see a church preaching that sex outside of marriage was sinful and against God's design as being stupid. That's what they would go, because they're the world and they hate Jesus. I think we did that before a few weeks ago. So he's simply saying we need to stop and think about how we articulate that in today's world, and certainly in this country, in the UK, and you might be experiencing it in the USA. The changes in the social climate on this issue are so dramatic, even in the last few years, that when we had civil partnerships sort of 8 or 9 years ago, it was a kind of, even if we don't agree, we should let people have their have their civil rights and so on. Then we can have an argument about whether. But that was the argument.
Well, no,
but now the argument is, under a decade later, is how could you possibly say that there was anything wrong with any aspect of homosexuality? So a church that is doing mission properly, that is thinking about how to speak into its context, has got to stop and go, how do we do this? How do we articulate biblical truth? And you know what? We pack people, missionaries, off to mission college, going to Africa and Asia and South America, and we give them cross-cultural training, right? We need to give Western Christians and Western church leaders cross-cultural training for the culture that they are in, because our Christian culture is not the world's culture that we are in. So, and that's all that Justin Welby was basically saying. He was basically saying, I'm not going to get into a trench of this now, because I need to work out where the land lies. I don't want to be digging into stone.
I think it's fair to say that Justin Welby understands that he's also speaking to a post-Christian England.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And remember, when he speaks, he's not just speaking to the church. He's speaking to the nation. He's speaking to all the Christians and non-Christians in the nation and overseas, because that will be picked up as well.
Now, a lot of people...
And so he's got to learn how to articulate. He's got to learn when to fight his battles and when to choose to do that.
Sure. Now, a lot of people have been emailing me. Do you get checks from Justin Welby? Is there a quid pro quo?
No, I think I get him, and there are two things really that I insist on, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
And the first is, I will not comment on a story about a speech until I've read the speech. I will not comment and make a judgment based on a snippet, which is what we got in the Telegraph report and the Guardian report. Not that they're not good journalists doing it, but essentially, if you want to know what he said in a question and answer session, read the whole of the answer. And the second thing, which I think I'm really clear on, and perhaps some of our viewers disagree with me, but I think it's absolutely fair. Judge him on what he actually does and actually says, rather than what you think he means and what you think he might do. And that's fair for any leader. You can judge and condemn rightly the leadership of tech because of what they have done and what they have said, explicitly denying basic Christian tenets, appointing people who have literally fractured the Anglican communion. But Justin Welby is an orthodox evangelical. He comes out of that stream. He believes a basic biblical moral on sexual morality. And just because he doesn't at every single second of the day preach that explicitly doesn't mean he doesn't believe it. What are we expecting? Are we expecting Justin Welby to stand up in a soapbox in the middle of London every day, preaching, condemning sin? And frankly, people who say to him, well, he should use every opportunity. Why aren't you out there like the Noahs doing that if you think that's important? Sure. No, because we understand there's a subtlety in the 21st century in how we do mission. We don't compromise on what is true, but we think about how we articulate and communicate into a nation, into a culture that has rejected Jesus and walks away from its Christian heritage. That's all that Justin Welby is doing. He's saying, I want to stop and think about this. I'm not just going to dig a trench and sit in here and that's it. I want to think about the land where the battle's going to take place.
Another interesting thing we learned about is the communion partner bishops from America, which are, well, there's only 6. There should be hundreds. But 6 of them flew into London, had a tete-a-tete with Archbishop Welby, and they replied and said what's about. But have you heard anything internally about...
I'm not sure that they even went to London. I think they may even have met him in Canterbury here, because he's got an apartment in the old palace, sort of a mile or so down the road from me here. Some people think that the communion partner bishops are sellouts, and some people think that they're faithful Orthodox Nicene Trinitarian bishops trying to hold the ground and fight for the last vestiges of truth in tech. The answer's probably somewhere there. Let's pray for these guys. These guys are operating in an environment where the leadership hates them. Look how Bob Duncan and Mark Lawrence and so on have been treated by Catherine Jefferts-Schori. The woman who says literally "shalom, shalom" from her lips, and then curses and brings down lawsuits on those who don't bow down to her, which is very interesting analogy, because my son's just been doing his summer Bible week, which has been Daniel.
Oh, good show. Yeah.
And so let's all bow down to 815 now in tech.
Yeah.
So pray for these guys. I think it's deeply significant because people have meetings with Justin all the time, and some of them are confidential and secret, and some of them are publicized. And the fact that they wouldn't have released a press statement unless Justin had agreed that they could release a statement to say that they had met him, and that means that Justin is willing to be known that he is meeting specifically with these specific bishops inside Tech, not the whole Tech House of Bishops, but these specific communion partner bishops. I think that's important. Read the signals. Justin Welby's doing this kind of grand tour of the Anglican communion. You had him over in the Americas recently. He's going to go around and try and build up the relationships again amongst the primates, from the primates to Canterbury, which have seemed to quite fractured for various reasons under Rowan Williams. And he's also going to, it appears, see particular groups of bishops as well. And so I think that's important. Pray for the communion partner bishops, because they are fighting a lone stand inside Tech, and I can absolutely understand why lots of people have left Tech, and I applaud them for that integrity, because when your bishop is a heretic, then you leave. And if you're a bishop who's getting persecuted by Nebuchadnezzar, KJS, then I can quite understand why you leave. But these guys are sitting firm, as it were, and wanting to preach biblical truth. And you know what? I've been out to dinner with at least one of them. These are guys who do the gospel. Absolutely.
All right, Peter, thank you for your report. Hope for more exciting news next week.
Let's see what happens.
Let the bromance continue.
Yeah.
Let's move on now to story 2. And this is a very difficult topic, and it's an international topic going on right now, and that's the civil war in Syria. George and I have talked about the Arab Spring since it started, because it kind of parallels Anglican Unscripted. Day 1 of Anglican Unscripted was day 1 of the Arab Spring. And there's been a lot of good and a lot of bad in the Arab Spring. The bad is the effect it's having on Christianity and Christians in those nations where people are fighting for democracy and renewal and are trying to flee from tyranny. Civil war now is happening in Syria, and we've recently learned that there's been a chemical attack, and some 1,400 people have died in that attack. Here in America, our President Obama has said he would draw a red line in the sand. America will not get involved in your civil war unless you guys use chemical weapons. That's happened, and he has to either decide whether he was bluffing or whether he's going to do what he said. Now, America, in no uncertain terms, is going to get involved in another war. We're not talking war here. So when America is reacting to this, we have to kind of redefine what war is. And we have to look at what presidents in the past have done successfully and unsuccessfully. First, I want to talk about the reference we made to Justin Welby. America here doesn't have to do too much with the Congress to get approval to go to war. We had the War Powers Act, where President Obama can pretty much do anything for 90 days without talking to anybody. After that point, Congress has to give its approval. But he did want to do what most presidents do, and that's get an international coalition of people together and say, can we do this as a kind of buddy-buddy and help support each other so you won't complain later when things go bad. He got England involved. Prime Minister David Cameron was really on board from the beginning and said, yeah, England's there with you. And he said, but I got to pass this by Parliament. What happened there, George?
Parliament said no. On Wednesday, there were debates, and in the House of Lords, Justin Welby, as Archbishop of Canterbury, stood up and objected to British military action against Syria. Archbishop Welby had two arguments. He began with the just war theory argument. Christian doctrine, Christian teaching lays out when war is an allowable state option. And in this case, it was not. There was no clear evidence at this stage that the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad had launched a chemical attack. Could have been the rebels. But even more than that, the argument for military force was an argument from political, internal, domestic issues. The striking against Syria would improve Barack Obama's U.S. political standing. It wouldn't do anything to further one side or another in the war. Killing people was just not going to achieve anything in this particular instance. And why take human life? Why take the most sacred thing that God has given us for egotistical reasons? That was the just war argument.
And the problem with Syria is our enemy is annihilating our enemy. And what is our responsibility in getting involved in that? Now, we are in the 21st century. We have technology beyond our means. We can get involved in wars and have influence in wars that we don't have to declare war in. And we've done that with some limited success and some failures over the last 30 years. And I think back at what other presidents have done when faced with this dilemma. They never, I'm not going to reference presidents who've had to deal with civil wars, but let's reference, well, I will in a minute, but let's reference quickly Ronald Reagan in Libya. People remember in 1985 and 86, President Gaddafi threatened America. We proved that he was involved in the Panama bombing. He did a bar in Germany. He killed some Americans, and he was involved in terrorism. He would stand up with a sword and say, I'm going to take down America. Reagan was left the decision, what do we do with a terrorist in charge of a country who's threatening us? And he decisively said, well, we'll bomb him back to the Stone Age. And they surgically bombed the palace, and we did not hear from the Libyan president, Gaddafi, for 30 years. Reagan did it right. Did he get lucky? Maybe. Was it the right thing to do? History will say, yeah. I mean, that stopped any terrorism coming out from Libya for 30 years.
Yeah, that's
in Syria, yeah.
Yeah, well, what Ronald Reagan did was something that's been going on for 100, 200 years called gun bloat diplomacy, where the great powers pull up a ship outside the Sultan's palace. He's captured a few American sailors, and we're going to bomb his palace, and he won't do it again. This was a distinctive mission, a distinctive outcome could be reached, and there was an opening and a closing, and everybody knew it was going to be. Can we say that about Syria?
Syria becomes a no-win situation. We have the technology to pretty much push a button and eliminate the chemical weapon stockpiles. That's not war. That's eliminating your enemy's ability to fight in a war. That's not putting troops on the ground. That's not doing all you need to do to pump in tanks and troops and bring in the big C-5s airplanes with your 1st Battalion. That's something different. And I think we need to now, as Christians, ask ourselves, where do we want to surgically put technology that could end war and end suffering quicker? And I don't have an answer for that. Civil war is one of the more difficult things, especially when the enemies of Christianity are fighting against each other. I don't really know where to put myself into this.
Justin, well, we raised this point as well, saying that a strike against the Assad regime would result in a pogrom against Christians by the regime. Right now, the Islamists are attacking and killing Christians. And oddly enough, Christians are safe under the regime of Assad. If we start attacking them, Assad is going to attack the Christians. They're going to get it from both sides. And there are 1 million plus Syrian Christians we're talking about here. It's a no-win situation, Kevin. You're right. Some foreign policy analysts, Edwin Lutbeck, I think comes to mind in particular, have said we should, Daniel Pipes, have said we should hope this war continues going on for as long as possible so that the enemy, our enemies, kill each other rather than turning on us. That's a terrible thing, but that's the unfortunate situation we're faced with right now. There are not going to be any winners in whatever we do or don't do in this situation.
Well, we need to also bring up Kosovo then. Bill Clinton entered us into a civil war in Kosovo that ended a genocide. Now, is that the starting point when we see a genocide happening in Syria? I don't know. Is chemical weapons the introduction of a genocide? Far bigger people in a higher pay grade will have to answer that. George, let's do our last story here. We're going to talk about the presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Schori. No Anglican Unscripted is complete without a story about her. And the Evangelical Lutheran Church, the ELCA. And now, the two came together last week, and that's why it's news. Apparently, the ELCA was having a meeting, and they needed a progressive liberal to come and talk to them, and they invited Catherine Jefferts Schori. During one of the Q&A sessions in the middle of the conference, a person stood up and said, all this is well and good, but why are the numbers, and by that I mean the members, of the Episcopal Church and the Lutheran Church tanking? Why have we lost 25% of our membership since 1965? And I think she thought for a minute, and it's obviously a question she's had before. What did she say, George?
Presiding Bishop Jefferts Schori said that conservatives are accusing the Episcopal Church and the ELCA of faithlessness, that the decline in numbers represents the departure of the Holy Spirit because we've followed a doctrine of inclusivity over the years, women and gays and so on and so forth. She says that she believes that this is a sign of fruitfulness, that the church is being pruned, it's being trimmed of the dead wood, allowing it to focus on issues that she believes are gospel imperatives for social justice and change.
There's a lot of truth to what she said, because the dead wood of the Episcopal Church just flew over to Canterbury to meet with Justin Welby. So the people who are being trimmed and thrown out and stuff like that are trying to seek some refuge. Here's the reality. Catherine Jefferts Schori, the presiding bishop, and the leadership of the Episcopal Church, and a lot of the progressives and liberals believe that Christians have got it wrong for 2,000 years. That, yes, Jesus came to change the world, but he came to change the world. And by that, he came to change climate change and social justice issues. He wants the church to work with the UN and give out mosquito nets, where for 2,000 years the church has taught the transforming love of Jesus Christ, that Jesus came to transform man and thus transform the world. And when you get that disconnect of the consequences of Jesus' coming, why he really came, you get this, I don't know why people believe in the church. We offer so many good things and hope. And by the way, we're handing out blankets for the homeless next week. I hope everybody will come and join us. There's that confusion as to why people aren't there to join them.
Well, it's not a confusion, Kevin. I mean, from my experience, going back to the mid-'80s when I first began the ordination process, the Episcopal Church is driven these days by its upper elites by class envy and class hatred. When I was a young man, I was told that the church doesn't need any more upper-class white males in the ministry. We don't need people whose families have been Episcopalians who come from an establishment background. Presiding Bishop Jefferts Schori in the first batch of initial interviews said one of the things she hoped to change about the Episcopal Church was its Eastern establishment outlook and way of doing business. Well, people like me in the Episcopal Church are considered the old-fashioned, the past generation that they don't need anymore. And at the same time, the Episcopal Church has no need for the working classes. My entire ministry has been working in lower middle class, working class, or rural parishes, and laborers, tradesmen, the people who make up the blue collar, the working mass majority of the United States, they're not welcome in the Episcopal Church. Bishop Jefferts Schori herself said in 2006, one of the reasons why we're a smaller church is that, unlike Catholics, we're better educated. That's the mark of a sect, not of a church that has neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free.
It's the mark of a dead church. And I'm not surprised that Catherine Jefferts Schori doesn't know that she's the part that's being pruned from the Anglican Communion, from Christianity. But if you want to go out and spread that gospel of global transformation, not personal transformation, go ahead. I'm not stopping you. All right, George, we're going to close out episode 80 of Anglican Unscripted. We're almost to 100. It's hard to believe, but we've done this 80 times. Maybe we'll have a cake and do a bilocational party when we get to 100. We'll see what happens. And interesting week. We've just put up a brand new AnglicanInc.com website. We've had the old website there for 2 years. It was a news source. It's going to continue to be a news source, but we have a different layout. We're trying to reapproach 2013 media delivery and not 2012 media delivery. Things keep changing. We keep changing. What's the big stories from Anglican Inc. this week, George?
That I'm an idiot. Oh, we have a brand new website, all the bells and whistles you could want, and I got a press release from Western Anglicans announcing that Bill Thompson is going to retire in 2014. So I thought, hey, we've got a press release section, up it'll go. And so I'm working on getting that press release up, and meanwhile the cat, who likes to sleep underneath the monitors, she's pregnant and likes the warmth of the heat from them, decides to start chewing the Rolodex. And so the U's and the V's are gone, and I'm trying to fight the cat, rescue the Rolodex, and put up a posting, and I changed Bill Thompson into Bill Murdoch. So the Bishop of New England for the ACNA is retiring, not the Bishop of Western Anglicans. And so up went and hey, if it's printed, it's got to be true.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened
I think people caught on real quick, and I was able to change the posting, but Bill Murdoch called me and said, I'm not retiring, and that worked out well. The joke was, in 2008, 2007, your single qualification to be a bishop, it wasn't acting at the time, it was ACN, at the time, was to be named Bill. We had Bill Atwood, Bill Thompson, Bill Murdoch. I mean, it just went on and on and on. And so that was the inside joke. And Bill Murdoch brought that up when he called me. He understood the problem. There's too many Bills. I know. So, yeah, it happens. But, we've had, about 3,000 viewers in the last week at AnglicanInc.com. Good to go. I guess that's the only interesting stuff. Please keep giving to GAFCON. We're still raising money. I have the rule that if you give into the GAFCON trip, you can't give again. We're looking for new donors. Here's AnglicanInc.com, AnglicanTV. I don't even know my own link. Anglican.tv/donate to GAFCON. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And you've been watching episode 80 of Anglican Unscripted.
It's obviously a question she's had before. What did she say, George?
Bishop Jeffrey Shorty said that conservatives accuse us of the church is smaller because of faithlessness. Mm-hmm. When reality is... Willy Wonka walked on Wednesdays through the woods as Theo sucked his thumb. I'm sorry, could we?
That's all right. Word.
Recording, audio fine, lighting good, everything all set.
Okay. All right, good.
You have a can of Pepsi, I have a can of Diet Coke. We should have a...
Oh, that's right. Tastes great. Less filling. We'll have the Anglican burp off. Okay, so let me turn this off. Now, basically we need to discuss what Anglican Unscripted is. And so I'll do the first part. It can't be more than 30 seconds. I'll do 15 seconds, you do 15 seconds, just off the top of your head. And it's just going to be a promo for Anglican Unscripted. Because the YouTube channel demands that I put a promo there. And I'm like, what? So, 3, 2, 1. Anglican Unscripted is the only Anglican video newscast in the whole Anglican communion. That means 80 million people have something they can do once a week.
Between us, we have about 25 years. That's so fun.
Yeah, that's good. No, it is. You're like,
between us, we have 25 years and reporting upon all shapes, sizes of the Anglican communion, and I think this is the place to come for news and views.
So, what you can do if you, what do we cover? just do like 3 things that we cover. We cover
The good, the bad, and the
church
ugly.
venue. Yes. So I'll say who we are, you say what we do.
All right.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Anglican Unscripted is the only video news source in the Anglican Communion. What did I say before? Someplace for 80 million people to go. 3, 2, 1. Anglican Unscripted is the only video news source in the Anglican Communion. It's really someplace where the 80 million people, all of them Anglicans, can come and watch videos.
We've been covering, between the two of us, the Anglican Communion and the Episcopal world for almost 25 years, and we are known for being despised by 815, the Anglican Consultative Council, and Bishop Jack Spong. What better credentials could you have?
Oh, that's pretty good. All right. 3, 2, 1. People often ask, what is Anglican Unscripted? And it's something that's completely indescribable. It is the only video news source for the Anglican Communion. But more than just Anglicans watch it, it's available to all Christians and atheists everywhere. Especially the 80 million, oh my gosh, million. It's a syllable, come on, million. It's 5 syllables. 3, 2, 1. Anglican Unscripted is the only video news source in the Anglican Communion, but we're open to Christians, atheists, and just about everybody.
And that describes the Anglican Communion. There are Christians, there are atheists, and we report on them all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Between the two of us, we've got 25 years experience, and we share with you our news and views, and hopefully give you a window on the wider world of Christ's work in the world in the church, through the church, by the church.
Got it. In the church. All right, that's it. That was very good. So we got our promo.